Hey, we're back with another episode of The High Ground, powered by Premier Companies. How's it going, Sal?
Doing wonderful today.
Great. Hey, in-house today, we have CJ Miller, farm broadcaster with Hoosier Ag Today. Good morning, CJ.
Hey, good morning, Ryan. Good morning, Sal. You mind if I do the introduction for you, if that's okay, Ryan and Sal?
Have at it.
You're listening to the High Ground Podcast, powered by Premier Companies, with your host, Ryan Priest and Sal Sama.
Yeah, well, you're hired.
Man.
Perfect.
How
Yeah,
about
see?
that? With special guest, CJ Miller.
Right.
And now, the High Ground Podcast.
And that's it. I don't have anything else.
I love
it. That's a
Let's
better.
just keep
Yeah,
that.
there we go. We'll
It's
just
almost
continue
like,
to use it.
well, you remember Don LaFontaine. He was the old movie trailer guy. Remember back in the day, 20 years ago?
Absolutely.
In a world where two men host a podcast
That's awesome.
and talk about agriculture. I've always wanted to do that.
I'm
Well,
stunned.
It sounds like you probably have practiced that, maybe, right in front of the bathroom mirror. So, that's hilarious. That's good stuff. Thank you very much for that.
Absolutely.
How do you get that voice? That's what I want.
Well, I tell folks that I get it from my mom, that she sang bass in the church choir years ago, and it just kind of passed down to me. And, but in all seriousness, I don't know how I
His
got
mom.
the voice. I don't know how I got it. It's,
I bet she loves that story.
Yeah.
she loves to hear it. I'm sure she will love to hear this particular podcast. And by the way, hi, Mom. I certainly appreciate you tuning in and checking this out. But always wanted to be in radio, always wanted to be in broadcasting. And this voice just kind of fell into place, I guess.
It
Man.
certainly did. Yeah, it certainly
My
did.
wife would get so tired of that voice if I could get it at home. I would be like,
Absolutely.
Kim, you need to do the dishes.
So, Kim, are you going to Kroger to do grocery shopping this evening? I would like for you to purchase some Lay's potato chips.
That's fantastic. I love it.
And people tell me, and I try not to sound like I'm Mr. Radio Guy all the time,
It doesn't work.
but I don't know if people say, can you ever turn that off? You sound like you're on the radio all the time. And I don't know how to turn it
This
off.
is how I talk.
This is my voice. This is how I talk. And so I guess I can just kind of, maybe change my voice a little bit.
We're going to skew it so you don't sound better than us. We're not the guests. You're not allowed to sound better than us. But yeah, we met him at the Taste of Excellence in Indianapolis in January, I believe it was. And I told my wife, I was like, yeah, that's what he sounds like all the time.
Oh, really? So your wife was even asking, does he
I don't
doesn't
think
sound
she
like that.
asked. I was just like, yeah, that's if you listen to him on the radio, that's how he sounds right there. I mean, a lot of times you don't, it's different, but yeah, it's like, nope, that's
Well,
how he sounds
with-
all the time.
With
So,
some folks, what you see is what you get, and other folks, they turn it on. It's almost like, remember Good Morning Vietnam with Robin
Yep.
Williams?
Yeah.
And the character that he portrayed was a far different one behind the microphone than
Absolutely.
what he was off mic. And it was somewhat based on a very loosely based on a true story, Adrian Cronauer, who served in Vietnam in the Air Force. But I thought as a kid watching Good Morning Vietnam, how can you be a different person on the air when the microphone is on versus when you're not on the air? And then I learned, well, it's easy. It's just, that's how most people do their jobs in radio and in broadcasting. It's a different, you almost become a character when you're on the radio. In fact, I grew up listening to 700 WLW in Cincinnati, which the signal comes in like gangbusters in southern and central Indiana. And I used to listen to a host called Gary Burbank, and he did afternoons on WLW, only to find out years later Gary Burbank wasn't his real name and that it really wasn't his voice. He was doing a character when he was being the DJ personality on WLW. His real name is Billy Purser. He's from Memphis and sounds like this when he talks to you, but on the air he sounds like this. And I thought, wow, I had no idea until years later. But yeah, I always grew up listening to Gary Burbank, grew up listening to Bob and Tom on Q95 in Indianapolis.
Yep.
And so, and also, grew up big fan of Johnny Carson, Dick Clark, Bob Barker, the legends of broadcasting in terms of television. Always kind of wanted to do that, but glad to be in farm broadcasting and glad to be working with Hoosier Ag Today.
Sweet. Well, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about farm broadcasting and Hoosier Ag Today, and we'll quit giving you a hard time about your voice. But I will conclude that with, I bet your order gets done faster at the drive-through than most people's, because they're like, oh my God, that's got to be somebody.
Well, and I do that. Hi, I would like to order a extra value meal number 1, please. A Big Mac with large fries and a large Coke with light ice, please. And
I have no idea who that is, but we should get that done.
They're tapping their headphones in the. They're like, what is this?
Who in the world?
So tell us about Hoosier Ag Today. We're obviously lots of subscribers. We either look at the website, or we get it in our inbox in the morning, or listen to it on the radio. So give us a little history on Hoosier Ag Today.
Well, Hoosier Ag Today was started by Gary Truitt. He's our owner. He's our chairman of the company. Still with us, and still the top guy in charge. He decided to kind of break off and start his own broadcasting entity long about 2006. Before that, he had been a farm broadcaster in Indianapolis, central Indiana, for many years prior to starting Hoosier Ag Today. In fact, I remember working afternoons at WKKG in Columbus, Indiana, and this was about 25 years ago. And in the afternoons, long about 2:30, 2:45, I would record Gary Truitt's afternoon closing market update off the satellite, and then replay that back during the commercial break at about 10 till 3 p.m. And so Gary's been doing it a long time, very knowledgeable about the broadcast industry, very knowledgeable about the farming and ag industry as well. And so we are on about 70 radio stations across Indiana, north to south, east to west. And we also have a podcast, a daily podcast. We have a newsletter that we send out to roughly about 10,000 different people. It arrives in their inboxes about 6 in the morning, Mondays through Fridays. We also have social media presence as well. So we're really reaching out to thousands and thousands of Hoosiers. We also have a sister company, Michigan Ag Today. We're on about 30 radio stations in the Michigan area. And the same way with Michigan Ag Today, we have a podcast, or rather a website, MichiganAgToday.com and HoosierAgToday.com. And so we try to not only provide updates on the ag industry, news about farming for Indiana farmers, but also try to keep everyone up to date on what's happening within the ag industry, because a lot of what we touch upon, you don't read about or hear about in the mainstream media.
Yeah.
When you're watching Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, when you're watching local news, a lot of times you don't get the breakdown of what's impacting Indiana farmers or farmers across the Midwest. And so that's what Hoosier Ag Today, that's what we strive to do, is to provide that news and information on a daily basis to farmers across Indiana, across Michigan, and across the Midwest.
Very good. So?
Well, I think we ought to jump into a topic, and probably one that comes top of mind is the Farm Bill coming up. And CJ, if you could kind of go through and say, I guess, a little bit about what the Farm Bill is, or maybe some misconceptions about, what it is, the components of it, and why it is so important.
Well, the Farm Bill, the current Farm Bill, and the way that it's set up through Congress is that it's set up for a 5-year budget. So the current Farm Bill was passed in 2018, and that is set to expire here on September 30th of this year, 2023. And so you have legislators in Washington, you have members of the U.S. House that are on the House Ag Committee, and that includes Indiana Congressman Jim Baird of the 4th District. You have the Senate House, or rather you have the Senate Ag Committee, and Indiana Senator Mike Braun, he's on that committee. And so you have these different factions within these committees that are trying to craft a bill. Now, the current Farm Bill was budgeted at about $867 million. The projection, as far as the budget for this next Farm Bill, it could grow to $1.5 billion. And that's because not only does the Farm Bill include funding for crop insurance programs and risk management programs, but also a huge chunk of that is to fund SNAP and welfare nutrition programs. And that includes school lunches for children in large cities. And so what folks may not understand is that the House Ag Committee, well, it's also the House Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry. So nutrition is a part of that on both the House side and the Senate side. And so that's a huge part of this pie. That's the part that's the current Farm Bill and will be part of the next Farm Bill. And so during the pandemic, a lot of SNAP programs, the funding was expanded because there was a concern that many children who were not attending school because of the lockdowns that were in place in 2020, 2021 weren't being fed during the day. If they were at home, perhaps they're not getting the nutritional meals that they would have otherwise received through a school lunch. So we have to keep those school lunch programs open. Also during the summertime as well, a lot of concerns that politicians had, which is why that portion of the Farm Bill has expanded so much. But you have a lot of factions, including Farm Bureau. You have the different factions within Washington, different ag agencies that are really pushing legislators to keep that component of the funding for crop insurance, keep it where it is, expand it even further because of inflation. But you have politicians that are saying that that are jockeying right now, trying to get funding for the nutritional component of the Farm Bill and the actual farm component of the ag component, if you will, of the Farm Bill. So a lot of moving pieces there. The concern is, will a Farm Bill be passed before the end of the current Farm Bill? And from talking to a number of different folks, it may not be passed in time for October 1st, which certainly lawmakers in D.C. will make some amendments and they'll pass some legislation to maybe kick the can down the road a little further in terms of the current Farm Bill. But a lot of folks that I've talked to in Washington and in the know believe that a new Farm Bill will be crafted and will likely pass before the end of this year.
That the inclusion, just to follow up quickly, I'm on a local school board at West Washington High School and in elementary, and that food component, as we went through the pandemic, we found out very specifically that kids that probably would qualify for free and reduced lunches, they don't apply, and their parents don't apply. And the alternative to not applying is sometimes going without. And as we went through the pandemic, we found that every child, regardless, I mean, they had breakfast and lunch provided, and it's hard to sort out that group of the ones who need it and who doesn't. But the family structures aren't the same as they used to be.
No.
20 years ago.
Well, and you have a lot of schools that if they say, well, you know what, we appreciate the funding, but we don't need it. Well, then the problem is then you're likely going to be turned down, or you won't continue to receive that funding if the funding is needed down the road. So a lot of schools, a lot of counties, a lot of states continue to keep the money coming in and say, well, I don't know of anyone that says, well, we don't need the cash. We don't need the funding. Here, Washington, take it back.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So, but yes, there are a lot of different factions that are trying to make sure that farmers still have that safety net in place.
So important.
Yeah, because that's why the Farm Bill was crafted in the mid-1980s, to make sure that those farmers who suffered from catastrophes such as storm damage, heat stress, drought stress. And we saw a little bit of that this past growing season. Luckily, nothing that was caused any significant damage to crops or livestock here this past year. We saw some damage with tornadoes in central Indiana and throughout the state here, March 31st, April 1st. And so you have a number of programs through USDA and the Farm Bill that are set up to kind of help cover farmers in the event that there are damages to their farms and crops. And so that's certainly a key component, and a lot of folks still fighting to make sure those safety nets are in place.
Got to have them.
Absolutely.
Another issue that you brought up as important to you as we were talking prior to you coming on was this loss of farm ground in the
Absolutely.
United States. Talk to us about your coverage of that.
Well, it's interesting because in 2022, this past year, USDA announced that 1.9 million acres of farmland was lost, either to residential development, commercial development, warehousing, and some farmland. What we've seen over the course of the past 23 years, since the year 2000 rather, is USDA estimates that perhaps 50 million acres of farmland has been lost here in the U.S. And so a concern that a lot of folks are having is that by the year 2050, we're expected across the planet, throughout the world, a population of 10 billion people. Well, if we're losing on average 2 million acres of farmland here in the U.S. a year, you do the math. How are we going to be able to feed that growing population in just a matter of 27 years with less and less farmland across the U.S.? And another concern, by the way, not only do you have less and less farmland, but you also consider the average age of the American farmer, 57 years old. You have a lot of farmers, and farming is one of the few businesses where you see men in their 70s and 80s still farming. And a lot of them, I have to give them a great deal of credit. They love doing it. They want to do it. But you see a lot of younger men and women who, I think for years and years, we've been taught in schools, go to college, get yourself a 4-year degree, get yourself a white-collar job, move away from the farm. Well, that's impacted farms. That's impacted a lot of jobs that we see. That's trade skills, trade jobs like contracting, land surveying. And so I'm also concerned about where the next generation of farmers will come from, because you really need a large farm operation. It's really a business, a large business. It's not like when my grandfather farmed in Shelby County in the 1950s and 60s, where you could farm with 140 acres, have some dairy cattle, and make a very good living off of just 140 acres. You really need several thousands, 1,000 acres or more to be able to farm and sustain a lifestyle or a great living for yourself. And you need people with you as a team to help you farm that land. And so those are kind of the big stories that we've been following with Hoosier Ag Today, and really trying to get some answers from different folks as to what are the solutions to solve the issue with farmland, the loss of farmland, and who's taking over as far as the next generation of farmers. I know that Kendall Culp, he's a state representative, and there is a bill in the Indiana State House where they're trying to keep track of the farmland that is lost here in Indiana. Not only how much farmland is being lost, but who currently owns the farmland that's out there right now.
That's a big concern, that who owns it and what it's being utilized for, and the fact that we're driving a lot of this management decisions to this ground based on how many ESG boxes we can check and some of those type of things, that it becomes very concerning that if you can't do all of these things, whether it's net zero on your carbon emissions or organic or whatever it might be, those who own it have enough money, they're just like, well, we'll just leave it set idle. That's even, that in my mind, that's even scarier than loss to urban sprawl or whatever it might be. So.
Well, one thing about the whether it's the residential or the commercial warehousing or even renewable energy, like with solar panels, or I don't think a lot of the listeners wouldn't understand that once that ground is lost, it will never come back.
Absolutely.
It'll never be productive again. You'll never grow food on that ground again, because the soil is so disturbed, the topsoil is so disturbed, that it'll never be productive again. It's not like you can take a warehouse and just pull it out of the ground.
Yes.
And once it's gone, it is gone. There is no plan B. And I don't know. I mean, I think that renewable energy is good, but why? I just don't understand why we can't put the solar panels on top of the warehouses. If they take ground out of production and put a giant warehouse there, why wouldn't you just put solar panels on top? But I'm sure there's reasons. And
Oh, absolutely. Same way with the windmills. You see a lot of wind farms, solar farms, and a lot of companies are trying to reach out to farmers and lease or purchase that farmland to put up those wind farms, those solar farms, and you see a lot of warehouses being built, especially if you drive along I-65
south of Indy.
South of Indy. In fact, you had a section there in the Whiteland area, and that's 3 large warehouses, one of which was damaged pretty significantly by the recent tornado that swept through, once again, late March, 1st of April. But you see more and more of these warehouses pop up. Amazon, and different companies that are occupying spaces that would otherwise be several hundreds of acres of farmland, and you just have to wonder. And of course, with housing developments, as every couple has several kids, and those kids grow up and have kids of their own. Yes, when you do the math, more people, more houses are needed. I understand that, but certainly. When you consider that so many housing developments are going up as well here, especially once again, since the year 2000, 50 million acres of farmland lost. And you wonder, boy, how are we going to continue to feed not just all of us here in the U.S., but, so much of what we grow here in the U.S. and here in Indiana is sent to China, sent to Mexico, Canada, Japan, exported overseas. And so a lot of different folks all around the world are depending upon what's grown and raised here in Indiana and across the U.S. to feed their populations as well. So it really is concerning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, in the essence of time and being respectful of your time, well, certainly we could continue this, and we hope you come back. But given that just because you gave us such a stellar introduction and threw us off our game just a little bit,
yes, sir,
you still have a question of the day.
Uh-oh.
We got so wrapped up in
he
our.
didn't want to do the question of the day, and he's the first guest that figured out how to get us off our
well
get us off our
done.
subject.
Bring it at me.
All right, here we go.
All right.
Your question of the day today, CJ, is name 2 items off your bucket list.
2 items off my bucket list. This is a more challenging question than you would think. First of all, I love
The fact that you're living the dream already. I can't
exactly.
imagine even have
What
a
else?
bucket list.
Check.
I've
right?
always, let me see here. Work for Hoosier Ag Today, check. Be a guest on the High Ground podcast, powered by Premier Companies, check.
He
There's
took
2
mine.
already.
I know.
By the way, I do have to say that is I'm a stickler for making sure I say names correctly. So, and by the way, and Sal, right?
Yep.
I always make sure, because I'm so afraid I'm going to call you Saul instead of Sal. But once again, I'm a big stickler for making sure I say names correctly. So
Did you
once
hear
again,
what they call him around here?
To be like my dad, Salvatore.
but that's why I'm
Get
always a
wood.
stickler for the High Ground podcast, powered by Premier Companies, making sure I get the full title.
Absolutely.
And making sure Premier Companies and Premier Ag gets their
we appreciate
gets
it.
the plug in. But in terms of bucket list, I love warm weather. I love traveling. I've been to the Caribbean, a number of different destinations in the Caribbean. I've been blessed to visit the Bahamas, Dominican Republic, Cayman Islands.
Wow.
I mean, Jamaica, Montego Bay. So I would have to say I would love to visit Hawaii, would love to visit the U.S. Virgin Islands. For one, you don't need a passport to travel to either place. Both are Hawaii, obviously a state. U.S. Virgin Islands, obviously a territory of the United States, so you don't need any sort of special arrangements or passport. I have a passport. You just don't need that. But also they speak English in both locations, so you don't have that language barrier because, traveling to Mexico, to Cancun, when you have that language barrier, that certainly can be a challenge. But I would have to say traveling to warm destinations, I thought, well, maybe I would love to travel to London, to Paris, to places in Europe. But, we get enough of that chilly, cold, rainy, wet weather here in Indiana for about 6-7 months out of the year. I don't know that I want to spend a summertime in London and have, rain and 65 degrees when I can get that, mid-April here in Indiana.
Absolutely.
So
all of March.
Yeah. All of the March weather that we just passed through. But I would have to say, traveling to those destinations, if I were to throw a second thing out there real quick, I've always wanted to own a 64.5 Ford Mustang. I don't know why. I've always wanted one. I may never have one. I've never driven one, but I always thought, man, that's such a gorgeous, especially one of those beautiful red 64.5 Ford Mustangs.
Candy apple, yeah.
Candy apple red. Oh my goodness, love those. So
Like it.
So I guess I would be a happy man. I could die a happy man if I could drive a 64.5 Ford Mustang while in Maui
There you go.
and kill two birds with one stone.
So what do you have?
Well, like I said, I'm already working for Premier Ag, right? So
There you go.
We got that one
Check
checked.
that box. Yes, sir.
But my mom went to Israel. It's been several years back, almost, maybe 20 years ago. And I've always wanted to go to Israel. I really like history, like military history, like biblical history. And I've always wanted to go to Israel. And it'd be so hard today with things in Syria and a lot of those things around. It'd be hard to go to Damascus. I mean, those places. I always wanted to do that and travel through, the Near East and just see some of those sites and those places. And the other thing would, and this one probably be more doable, is to go in the opposite direction, but like fly into Anchorage and drive back.
Oh, wow.
And just take a 2-week tour. I wouldn't want to drive there because you're kind of on a schedule to get a plane ride home, but maybe take the family sometime, fly into Anchorage and just get a rental and come home.
You see, I love traveling. The only thing I get a little weary about is the actual traveling in and of itself.
Yeah.
Going to the airport, getting a connecting flight, waiting at a second airport from Indianapolis, having to fly from Atlanta or Miami or Dallas to a second destination. And then that's why I prefer to travel to the Caribbean, because for the most part, it's the same time zone, Eastern time zone. You don't have the jet lag. So if you were to travel to Israel, I would think that Israel, 6 hours ahead?
Probably, yeah.
6-7 hours ahead. Anchorage is, about 5 hours behind, 5-6 hours behind. So you have that jet lag. It takes such a long length of time on a plane to get there. I love being there once I get there.
Yep.
But it's just the travel, and then you turn back home. And so that's the weary part, but I love getting to my destination once I get to the destination.
Yeah, for sure. Well, mine would be just to own a destination home someplace warm. I haven't really picked it out.
Well,
I
hold
used
on
to
here.
think
And
I don't know why anybody.
Mine is to know somebody that owns a destination home somewhere warm. That would be even better for my part.
Well, so far you don't. But
Well, wait a minute
maybe.
here.
Play your cards right.
You mean to tell me that, you live in Monroe County, right?
No, I live in Greene County.
You live in Greene County. So
Yeah.
that's not a destination home there?
It's
Staycation.
yeah, exactly. It has been. It has been so far.
You got
Yeah.
that plumbing all fixed.
Yeah, it's
after
all
the pipe
fixed. We don't
froze.
have 7 sunroofs in our kitchen anymore. So no, but someplace warm. I haven't decided yet. When I was younger, I usused to think I can't imagine why somebody would want to live necessarily in the north.
Mm-hmm.
Now I can't to figure out why anybody wants to live like north of Atlanta.
Exactly.
The older I get, the worse it gets on the cold weather.
Well, and
So-
when I have folks that tell me, "Oh, you should go to Colorado. You should go skiing." No.
right, is there
No.
in the snow?
There's
No.
enough snow here during the
Exactly.
wintertime. And I think if you live here in Indiana, if you shovel snow during the wintertime, you get a little jaded and that's how I feel. I don't want to go surround myself and be in 20-degree weather and fall and especially skiing. I've never skied before. Now I've been tubing, but never been skiing. So, that risk injury.
Right.
And then I'm going to be in a cold destination on top of that. So
I never think recreation when I think snow.
No.
Cold
Just
and
for some-
hurt.
No.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm even
For sure.
cold when I watch the Winter Olympics on TV.
Yeah, I don't like any.
Or
of
if
that.
I watch a game like a Green Bay Packers game in January, if they make the playoffs, I'm cold watching a game like that.
Agreed.
So that's
And when
why.
they hit the ground, you're just like, oh, there's no way that feels good.
No.
No way that feels
No,
good.
absolutely not.
And my second one, I'd like to own a 1952 Fender Telecaster.
Oh,
Oh,
fantastic.
wow.
Do that. But
And those
That's-
Fenders are gorgeous
that's
guitars.
down the road.
Those are absolutely gorgeous. Are you looking at
In
one
fact,
that's
that may be one or the other type items.
And why that year?
Well, that's the Blackguard Telecasters. That's like if you're into guitars, that's kind of that era, that first 1950 to 1952. That's kind of the era of those that you want. That the earliest models, and they're just like the epitome. There's the sound, the wood, and all that stuff they were made out of. It's kind of
And a
it's
PV,
kind of a big
PV
deal.
amp and a Fender guitar and
Yeah.
incense and peppermint.
There you go.
Now-
see, and I tell you, but I don't know that I'll ever own one, because I heard one guy who I hold in very high esteem as a guitar player say, you don't need to own a vintage Telecaster or a vintage guitar that's going to cost you several tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, because you never want to underestimate your ability to make an expensive guitar sound like crap. So far I've not pulled the trigger on anything that would cost me that much.
Well, let me
money.
ask you this real quick, Ryan. If you were to purchase a guitar that was owned by a famous musician, who would that be? Would it be like Eric Clapton or Jimi Hendrix or?
Well, that'd be left-handed. Jimi Hendrix would be a left-handed guitar.
Nope.
No, he
No,
played
he played a right-handed
he
guitar
played
left-handed.
Yes.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
his would work. So a Telecaster, because that's just that's my preference of guitars. If somebody, I don't know, Don Rich, we talked about him before on the podcast, somebody like that who would have played one who's, they've been gone for 50 years now. Those guys have been gone, so all their guitars would be vintage. And as far as I know, all guitars are preloaded with the same 3 chords that I know. A lot of them have a lot more than that, but I haven't been able to unload them.
Smoke on the Water, right? Smoke on
Yep.
the Water, China Grove. Yeah, you can play those same chords on the.
I mean, GC&D will get
Yes.
you through most of the 70s.
And if you throw in an A minor every once in a while,
Exactly.
maybe even a D minor,
Yeah.
you get yourself a, you're actually a musician
Yeah,
if you can throw in a
absolutely.
4th or 5th chord.
and then
Yeah.
Sweet Home Alabama, and then you've got the trifecta.
And you got it. You got it. That's all I've got for today, though. CJ, thank you so much for coming in. We look forward to having you back, hopefully, and listening to you
absolutely.
on Hoosier Ag Today. Sal, you got anything else?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground. It's been a lot
Sure
of
did.
fun.
Thank you very
Fantastic.
much.
By the way, can I do the closing of the show?
Have at it.
This has been the High Ground Podcast, powered by Premier Companies, with your host, Ryan Priest and Sal Sama. Tune in next time to the High Ground Podcast, here, powered by Premier Companies.
Hey, one more thing before we actually jump off. Can you make sure they like and subscribe? Because sometimes when we ask them, they don't.
Oh, okay. What's the website, by the way? Is it
PremierAg.com.
Yeah.
PremierAg.com. And by the way, HoosierAgToday.com.
There you go.
If you want to check out all the great farm news that we produce on a daily basis, once again, Hoosier Ag Today, HoosierAgToday.com. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at Hoosier Ag Today, and PremierAg.com. Visit PremierAg.com for the latest episode of the High Ground Podcast, powered by Premier Companies. This is CJ Miller for Hoosier Ag Today.
Outstanding.
Thank you,
so
CJ.
much.
All right, thank you,
very
gentlemen.
much. Yep.
Appreciate it.